All right, guys, we're back with Mishnayot Masechet Berakhot, the tractate Berakhot, blessings. Again, Perek Chamishi, Perek Hey, the fifth Perek. And this time we're going to be looking at Mishnah Bet, the second Mishnah in the Perek. All right, let's get started. Let's begin by reading through the entire Mishnah together to get a sense of how it sounds. Read it slowly with me. Mazkirin gvurot geshamim betchiat hametim, v'shoalin hageshamim bevirkat hashanim, v'havdala bechonen hadaat. Rabbi Akiva omer, omra bracha revi'it bifnei atzma. Rabbi Eliezer Omer behoda'ah. All right, so we're going to break this down into 5 segments. Let's look at this first line and see if we can identify any words that we recognize as verbs. The first word that we see that's a verb is mazkirin. It comes from the root zecher, which means memory or to remember. Something that you may have noticed about verbs that we encounter in the Mishnah is that when they're in the present tense and plural, when we would normally expect to see the verb end with the suffix yud mem, in our case here it would be mazkirim, it often ends with yud nun instead. This is simply the way that Mishnaic Hebrew works. The suffix yud nun means present tense plural, as in this case, where mazkirin means that we recall. Now let's take a look at the special terminology section of our packets and see if any of the words from our sheet appear in this first line of our Mishnah. So first, right off the bat, we see that mazkirin gvurot geshamim. It appears in our special terminology section. It's defined there as to recite the phrase mashiv haruach umorid hageshem in the second blessing of the Amidah. And that second blessing of the Amidah is the one which begins atagibur and ends with mechayei hametim. So the Mishnah is telling us here that we recite this phrase, we recall the strength, gvurot geshamim, the strength of the rains, by reciting this phrase, mashiv haruach umorid hageshem. So when is it that our Mishnah is telling us that we recite this? Betchiat hametim. We add this line in tchiat hametim, which is also a phrase that we see in this special terminology section of our work, and which means our special terminology section tells us that this is a reference to the blessing of the Amidah that's called Mechayei Hametim. So when do we add Mashiv Haruach Umorid HaGeshem? We add that phrase in the blessing of the Amidah called Mechayei Hametim. So now that we know the vocabulary for the section, let's try to read it and translate it together. Mazkirin gvurot geshamim. We mention the divine power of rainfall by reciting the formula Mashiv Haruach Umorid HaGeshem. Betchiat hametim, in the blessing of the Amidah, Mechayei hametim. So let's look at this next line of the Mishnah. We see that Vishoalina Gishamim is defined in our special terminology section as we ask. It means we ask for the rains, and in our special terminology section, it's defined as we say this phrase V'ten tal umatar livracha as part of the 9th blessing in the Amidah. This 9th blessing in the Amidah is the one that begins Barech Aleinu and ends Mevarech Hashanim. It's often called, in English translation, sometimes the blessing of the years, because it ends Mevarech Hashanim. We have encountered now in our Mishnah two similar words. In our very first line, we said mazkirin, which means to recall or mention something. And here in our second line, we have shoalin, which means we ask for. In both cases, we're talking about praying for rain. We have two different prayers for rain that are added to the Amidah. And we're going to talk about the distinction between these two terms, mazkirin and shoalin, and what this difference implies in the context of our Mishnah. And we'll discuss that later on in class. So next, we see a phrase that begins with the word birkat. This indicates that it refers to a specific blessing. In this case, birkat hashanim is the 9th blessing of the Amidah. So let's put this whole line together. Vishoalin hagishamim. The prayer for the rains is recited b'virkat hashanim, in birkat hashanim, the 9th blessing of the Amidah. All right, let's look at our next line here and see what it tells us. Havdalah, we recognize that word. It's the ceremony at the end of Shabbat that recognizes the separation, the differentiation, the distinguishing between Shabbat and the rest of the week, the non-sacred, which is referred to as Chol. Our Mishnah, up until now, has discussed things that are added to the Amidah, specifically two different mentions of rain that we add to the Amidah. So we can be relatively certain that when our Mishnah mentions Havdalah here, it doesn't mean the actual Havdalah service that we say on Saturday night, but instead, according to our special terminology, it refers to the special section of the Amidah, the special addition to the Amidah that is inserted during Ma'ariv on Motzei Shabbat, meaning the Ma'ariv, or evening service, that's recited right after Shabbat ends. We actually recite a form of Havdalah twice, once during that Ma'ariv, Motzei Shabbat, and once as its own service, the Havdalah service that you're all familiar with from, I think, 4th grade with Maura Jackie. So when is it exactly that we add this Havdalah addition to the Amidah at Ma'ariv after Shabbat ends? Well, our Mishnah tells us that it's in the section of the Amidah called Chonen Hada'at, which our special terminology section tells us is the 4th blessing of the Amidah, beginning with Ata Chonen and ending with Chonen Hada'at. So let's put all of our third line here together. Vehavdalah, the Havdalah addition to the Amidah, Bechonen Hadat, is recited in the blessing Chonen Hadat. Let's look at our 4th line. It's our longest line, but it actually only has one word that appears in our special terminology section. That word is Omra. Omra means that one says it. Remember that it's an extremely important part of learning Mishnah that we have to turn all of our pronouns into nouns so that we can understand what the Mishnah is really talking about. In this case, if we say that Omra means says it, what exactly is the it that one says? So in order to understand that, all we have to do is look back at our previous line in the Mishnah. Omra must mean that one says the special Havdalah addition to the 4th blessing of the Amidah. That's exactly what our previous line was talking about. What other words or phrases do we see here in our 4th line that might be challenging? Beracha revi'it is something that we need to take note of. Bracha, blessing, revi'it, 4th. Means the 4th blessing. Notice that Everywhere else we've seen this Mishnah tell us that we recite something in a particular place in the Amidah. That place has had the prefix bet, as in, here it would be Berakhot Revi'it, in the fourth blessing. But in our case, it doesn't say in the fourth blessing. It just says Berakhot Revi'it, fourth blessing. Why do you think that might be? Let's see if our Mishnah explains it. Bifnei atzma, by itself. All right, so here we see this is why our Mishnah didn't say in the fourth blessing, because it's recording, our Mishnah is recording an opinion that Havdalah should be recited as a fourth blessing of the Amidah on its own. According to this opinion, Havdalah should be its own blessing within the Amidah. It shouldn't be added in to part of another blessing. It should be its own blessing, and specifically the fourth blessing of the Amidah. So let's put this whole fourth line together. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Omra, one says, specifically one says Havdalah, Bracha Revi'it Bifnei Atzma, as a fourth blessing by itself. So notice here that we've had a disagreement. Our Tana Kama, the anonymous first speaker of our Mishnah, said in the third line that Havdalah is recited as part of the blessing Chonen Hada'at, which is the already existing fourth blessing of the Amidah. Rabbi Akiva disagrees with our Tana Kama and says, no. Actually, Havdalah should be recited as its own fourth blessing of the Amidah. It should be the fourth blessing, not it should be part of the already existing fourth blessing. Let's move on to our last line here. And here we have, again, only one word from our special terminology section. That word is behoda'ah. Literally, hoda'ah is thanks or thanksgiving. And behoda'ah means in the Thanksgiving blessing. It refers to the 18th blessing of the Amidah, where we begin with Modim Anachnu Lach, and we bend our knees. It means we give thanks before you. And that blessing ends with Velachana Elohodot. Usually that blessing, that 18th blessing of the Amidah, is simply referred to as the Modim. So let's put this final fifth line together and let's translate it. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Behoda'ah, we recite Havdalah in Modim, the 18th blessing of the Amidah. So what we have in this Mishnah then is, the last three lines of it, is a three-way disagreement on when exactly it is, or how exactly it is, that we recite Havdalah on Saturday night in the Ma'ariv davening. Our Tana Kama, in the third line, says that Havdalah is simply added in to the fourth blessing as it is, Chonen Hada'at. Rabbi Akiva comes along and says, no, Tana Kama, you're wrong. I, Rabbi Akiva, say that Havdalah should be its own full bracha, its own full blessing in the Amidah, and it takes the place as the fourth blessing. Rabbi Eliezer comes along and says, no, Tana Kama and Rabbi Akiva, you're both wrong. I, Rabbi Eliezer, say we recite Havdalah in Modim, in the 18th blessing of the Amidah. And that's it for this Mishnah. We will discuss what exactly these different opinions mean, what opinion actually we hold by, what do we actually do, the halacha lama'aseh, the halacha lamaisa, the practical application of this law, and more in our class next week. Enjoy the video, and if you need to rewind, keep doing so until you are able to work your way through this Mishnah on your own.